And then leave.
Okay.
So among the available topics, we had All Ireland's Bone Competition. We had Tom as a bones maker, and with some interesting insights into Irish music over the years, and interesting customer stories. Mel, of course, was
Here he is.
on the faculty at both universities and is a avid bones player who did his doctoral thesis on actually the Mercier bones playing. So those are some of the available topics.
What were they? What were the topics?
Mostly about me, really.
Oh,
Yeah, there was Tom. Yeah, there was Tom, and then the other one being All Ireland Bones. But even the role of bones playing in Irish music, I think I overheard you saying that there's really so few bones players in Ireland. I can tell you that bones playing is really popular with American tourists in Ireland. Not necessarily quite as popular with Irish music.
Or Guinness.
Yeah, it's there are very, very few bones players in Ireland.
Why is that now?
Well, no, I think it's because people don't like the sound of it. Musicians don't like the bone, pure and simple. Yeah, I mean, all tune players, most of them do not like the bones because they're sharp. The sound is sharp, and I think it's also fair to say that most people who play the bowron, and the bowron is hugely popular, most of them don't play the bones. So there are very, very few bowron playing bones players in Ireland. This hasn't taken off, so it's something to do with the aesthetic kind of preferences of musicians, both rhythm players and tune players.
But you're saying they don't like the sound. That kind of surprised me because to me it's very, very similar to Irish dancing with all the clicking and stuff with the heels and toes.
Yeah, but musicians don't like dancers either.
This is true.
Well, that's really interesting. I felt I had to earn respect, and even in an Irish group, and I think, my gosh, this is your instrument, but it doesn't work that way.
It isn't. I talked to Kate earlier on, and I mean, the bones may have been more popular in Ireland, maybe in the second half of the 19th century, when minstrelsy was popular, very popular in Ireland. And that was precipitated by American, right back to the Virginia minstrels, who came a year after they were formed. They toured Ireland. A lot of minstrel show activity. And the tambourine, which travelled with the minstrel shows, became very popular in Ireland. But the bones didn't. As far as
even sessions.
No, there were no sessions. There are no sessions in Irish music until like the 1960s. So, but the tambourine became popular. It was very, very popular from the time from the end of the 19th century, and then up through the 20th century, when eventually it morphed into the bowron. That's what we understand. So somewhere between the tambourine and military drum, and then a skin tray used on for domestic use. The bowron emerged out of some kind of combination of those, but really not till the middle of the century. But the bones did not take off in the same way. And during the revival in traditional music in the 1960s and 70s, when the bowron just spawned, the same did not happen to the bones. Although you could find people playing, I mean, the bones are idiophone, so they're like similar to somebody tapping a coin on a bottle or something, or the spoons. And they were quite popular in the sessions that emerged in the 60s and 70s. but bones playing as a serious art didn't really take off. And it is because of the frequency of the sound and the fact that the Barron took a long time to establish itself as a sound. And there were lots of really bad Barron players who didn't quite understand how to sit in to sessions and understand ensemble music. You can get away a good bit with Barron playing if you don't play too loud, but you can't hide the bones. So if you're just starting off, and as you know, if you sit into almost any session in Ireland, you're sitting in with really, really good musicians. And sometimes you're sitting in with, internationally known musicians. It's not like going to a symphony concert where you're in the audience and they're up on the stage. I mean, that happens as well. But it's also much more informal. So if you just picked up the bones and you're, starting to learn and you can't really play them, and you sit in on a session like that, well, of course the musicians are not going to take too well to that. If a fiddle player, on the other hand, comes in, they won't always understand the etiquette in the same way. They can also make the same mistakes. But generally speaking, for some reason or other, they will kind of understand that they're not going to play until they know the tune, until they're at a kind of particular level, and then they might have. But that's the thing about the bones, they're sharp sound, and they define the passage of time really, really clearly. So if you're out of time, it's very easy to hear it on the bones. If you're out of time on the Barron, for example, it's not so, there's a warmth in the drum anyway, so like, I'm going to stop talking saying, but people talk about the Barron as being like the heartbeat. So it has that because of the lower frequencies of it, it's attractive. And if it's played in a very simple way, it has that feeling of kind of motor rhythm, which is like the heartbeat. So, we resonate with that, we find that attractive. And also because the frequency of it doesn't get in the way of the tunes. It sits underneath. Whereas the bones competes right up there, and sometimes above the tunes because of the frequency of it. So it's just not, it's clearly not that appealing to people. And so when you do see bones players now, that's why it's one-handed. Yeah, I mean, whatever about trying to get away with playing one hand on the ball. Yeah, if you do this, as some of you have done, in an Irish session, you're just asking for trouble. Because the preferred way to present yourself is like this. And almost audible is, I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry. No, sorry. I know I shouldn't be here. Yeah. Compared to, look at me. Yeah. And we know why that is, because the American two-hand tradition comes from traditions of entertainment, from minstrelsy and from vaudeville, and so it's a different. There's a flamboyance in it, which is not appreciated in the traditional Irish music context. There have been one or two flamboyant bones players, most notably Paddy Sport Murphy from Abbeyfield, which is where the All Ireland bones playing competition takes place. But Paddy would have been a controversial enough character. Even if he didn't play the bones, Paddy would have been quite a controversial character. But he was very flamboyant. It's quite unusual, and so it's only big characters like him can kind of get away with that. So that's it. I'm saying more.
What? Can I ask a
Like
question?
every time I hear
Question?
Mel talking, I learn something new. I do seriously learn something new every time. So ask him questions.
I just, how come there's enough popularity to have the competition at Abbey Field. There's enough bone players.
Great question. Yeah, please.
With my, like when Mel is talking, I keep thinking of my own experience. And Mel is saying that bones aren't liked. They're not liked by musicians, but they are liked by people listening. And one of the reasons is, I think, this is only my own view, one of the reasons I think that musicians don't like bones is that if you're a good bones player, you do steal the limelight, even if you don't hear it.
Could you speak louder?
Okay.
Yeah.
If I stand up, is that
Yeah.
better?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Can you hear me now? But like even if you are, even if you're doing it lightly, people kind of look. So I have a brother. I have two brothers actually, and they're both multi-instrumentalists. And one of them in particular plays the banjo and the mandolin, and the bodhrán and the piano and the harp and the fiddle and the guitar, all types of guitars he plays. And I was in Abbey Field with him a couple of weeks ago at the launch of the flat, and we found this pub and there was about 10 old guys like ourselves. There used to be a time we'd sit out and say, look at all the old guys in the pub. But
Now
they
a
were
few.
indistinguishable from them now. But there were 10 of them sitting there, and one after the other, after we played a tune or a song, they'd come up and there was a stool there, and they'd sit at the stool and make a request, and he could play and sing every single song from every single genre. And then I took out the bones and just took all the attention away from him, and he got jealous. So it's musicians that don't like the bones, and they don't, and they're right not to like bad bone playing because you can't ignore it.
Yeah.
But I was very lucky in Galway in 1979 when I discovered the bones. I went to a session. Well, we were having sessions anyway, but I went to a session that was run by. Do you remember Tony and Jackie Small?
Yes.
And I think Jackie died, or was it Tony? One of them passed away. They were very, very famous musicians around Galway and around Ireland, and they were top notch. And they were kind enough, when I look back on it now, to put up with me to learn the bones at their sessions. They probably are. I was actually talking to Jackie years ago. Now look at you got the first 5 minutes. But I was talking to Jackie maybe 12, 15 years ago, and he said, "Yeah, I remember you." He said, "We said we'd just give you a break," and he did give me a break, and I learned how to play the bones in a real live session, which is the best way to do it. And then one of the best bodhrán players, I think, in Ireland is Johnny Ringo McDonagh. And the reason I think he's the best is he does exactly what Mel described. He's the heartbeat. If you listen to him and the Dodona, he's the heartbeat. The current bodhrán style, the top end,
You know, all the bass rounds.
it's very pop. It's not the same instrument, I think.
Yeah,
But
no,
his
it's definitely
playing is just kind of lovely. He's fantastic. I learned how to play bones listening to a cassette tape of him playing with. Well, it's some kind of culture. It wasn't exactly a culture.
Did he play with his hand? Not.
Both, but I only ever saw him play with the stick. But he played bones in one of their cassettes. And does anyone here remember cassette tapes? So I brought it with me everywhere, and I also brought a pencil and a piece of sellotape. Because they'd wear out and break, and then you just wind it up with the pencil and then find the break and kind of slice it. So I had that tape, and I learned how to do it. And then I met him, and they say you should never meet your heroes. I met him in the session that he was running in Galway, in Connolly, and I was bringing my son up for the weekend, and I went in, really proud of myself, and I said, "What's this now? I get to play with Johnny Ringo McDonagh." And I went up to him and said, "Johnny, can I join in?" "No." And I said, "Okay," and I sat down. And then he came over to me, and he said, "Look, it's nothing personal," he said. "In fact, I have bones in my bag." But he said, "Those two fiddlers over there, they hate bones playing." He says, "I'm afraid to take them up." So it just, as you were saying, that was actually my truth. So a few years later, I was back again in the same pub, and I said, "I'll try again." So I went over to Johnny and I said, "Do you mind if I join in?" "Yeah, come on." He said. So I didn't remind him about the previous time because I was on a roll. So I sat down beside him and played. I was really enjoying myself. And then there was a break, and he came over to me and said, "Give me those bones, I'll show you how to play." And the most annoying thing about that is he did. Because I just made it up as I went along, and I still kind of do. But like in 5 minutes, he showed me that's how you do it. And he was able, like he was with Dana, he was able to mingle in and intermingle with the things.
What did he have to say?
Yeah.
What did he have? What was the secret he gave you in 5 minutes?
Oh, he didn't say anything. He just,
Yeah.
I was just watching just the way he was playing. And like I used to play like, I used to keep going like that and breathe. And what he was doing is, you know, that sort of. He was going in and around, and one thing he did say was the gap is just as important as the beat. So like they were going, it's okay, but after a while it gets, and then if you go.
It sounded in a group that would be important.
Yeah. And just even string it like that sometimes.
Ooh.
The only thing is sometimes you lose the note like it goes and it goes up there and you have to catch it again. And then what was the final thing? The Abbey Field. So my brother and I, like, we love playing sessions together, but he always gets, especially after a few beers, he gets cranky about something. There's always something. So I try and sit the other side of him. I try and put a brother between us. So he'll get cross at him, not at me. And then we keep changing instruments anyway, so we keep moving around. So he usually, generally, kind of gets to the point where he says, you know, you just play bones. I play all this stuff here, and everybody's looking at you. How do you do that? Why do you do that? So, and then we get over it, and it's grand. So I said to him one day in 2011, I think, I said, guess what, Red? I've got into the All-Ireland finals of the Bones competition. And he said, I didn't know there was a Bones competition. I said, yeah, Abbey Field, the All-Ireland Bones competition. He said, how did you get in? I said, I just gave them €10. And they put me on the thing. So that's the way it was, I think, because of Paddy Sport Murphy. He just saw there was a gap in the market, I guess, and he said, this is the All-Ireland. And nobody challenged him. So, and it is the All-Ireland. It is a great competition, and the standard goes up and up every year. And then a few years ago, some Americans started coming over, which to me has dramatically improved everything about Bones, because, like, we were, well, from my experience, I mean, we were very jig, reel, hornpipe, please don't play a polka. That was kind of, whereas Americans came over, you're so organised about stuff, and you know all the notes and all the beats and love polkas. Yeah. And it really did enrich. But a few Americans, in fact, an American lady, Gail, what's her second name? She won the All Ireland Championship. So because there was Americans in it, it's now the World Bones Championship. And I don't think anybody is competing with that either. So.
What other countries are likely to show up? Anything? Or?
Well, I sell bones to 28 countries all over the world.
Boy.
Have a guess which is the biggest market for my bones? Irish bones, what's the biggest market worldwide?
Japan.
Japan? Yeah.
Japan's very high on the
Japan?
list.
Australia? France?
Australia's on the list.
France?
France, there's a lot in France and Brittany as well.
Dupin, he's in France.
Hmm?
The one who won
Nicholas
a couple years
Dupin,
ago.
yeah.
That's
Nicholas
right,
Dupin.
Nicholas Dupin, yeah. He has a face like a boron. See him on Facebook, you just see his body and a picture of a boron. But the biggest country that I send bones, and I don't send many bones, 20 or 30 pairs a year worldwide, is the UK. It's the UK.
Oh.
I wouldn't have ever thought that, but then it absolutely makes sense when you think about it. One of the next ones, Germany. Next one, Holland. And bones I make, they just seem to be very big. I don't know why. I try and make small bones, and they keep getting bigger. And I remember when we were at the Bones Fest with the amazing Steve Brown in New Hampshire. I had no bones with me for the first pass-off session. So Steve just sidled up to me and put a pair of bones in my hand. I said, that was very big. And I was crazy. They're so big. And then I looked down at them. irishbones.com. The pair I had sold to him. He came back and said, "Now, Tom, do you realize how big your bones are?" I said, yeah, I do. So, but I was going to say something else about New Hampshire.
You were saying England is big. Is that all over England, or mainly Scotland, or where?
It's Scotland a little bit, but it's kind of down in the southwest of England, down in Cornwall, and there's a place that there's a festival. They call it the Abios Festival, which is their pronunciation of hobby horse. And it's a place called Padstow in Cornwall. And I think it's the oldest festival in the UK. That's what they say anyway. You know, like Abbeyfield has the World Bones Championship, well, Padstow in Cornwall is the oldest folks festival in the world. And what they do is they all dress up. They're like sailor suits. They're like white uniforms, and they either have red or blue kind of neckerchiefs, and they parade through the streets. And there's an awful lot of accordions, there's folk instruments, and basically everybody gets an instrument. Hundreds of people parade through the street, and there's an hobby horse behind them, a big kind of a sheet with the horse's head, and there's one guy is the black horse and another guy is the white horse. And the idea is they reenact a battle between the two, and I forget which one wins, but one of them always wins. So there's guys in big kind of cartwheel kind of things, and they're in like that in the horse, and the sheets are swirling around, so it's amazing to see. And they have a marshal. It's like the Grand Marshal of the St. Patrick's Day parades. They have a marshal leading the thing every year with a little kind of a mace. And the Grand Marshal a few years ago was a bones player, and he lost his bones. And he contacted me through Facebook, and he said, "I'm in trouble, man, I lost my bones." And I said, "Oh, that's terrible, like, who are you? Why is it important?" So he told me he needed the bones because he was the Grand Marshal, and he was going to hold the mace in one hand and play his bones in the other. And I said, "Okay, so what would you like? What sort of bones would you like?" And he said, "Well, I need bones about 12 inches long and as heavy as you can make them." I was never asked that before.
Never, yeah.
I was asked the exact opposite. And I said, "I can do that, but are you sure you want like 12 inches? Very, very long for bones." And he said, "Yeah, that's what mine were." And I said, "Okay. I could do 10-inch ones." I was trying to figure out how am I going to talk this guy down to at least 8 inches. Most guys like to talk themselves up to 8 inches, but I was trying to talk them down. Yeah, so English guys. Yeah. I said to him, "I have bones in my shed, but they're only about 10 inches long." He said, "Okay, well maybe 10 inches." So what I did was I made 2 pairs for him. I made 10-inch pair, and I made, I think it's just over 7-inch pair. And the 10-inch pair I deliberately went as high up the bone as I could, so it's so thick, it's hard to get your hand around it. And I did a video for him. I said, "Here's the 10 inches that you ordered, and here's the other ones." So he ordered the other ones. And I said, "Great." So I prepared them, and I cleaned them, and I inscribed them, put his name on them, and put Abios Festival and all that. And then he rang me up and said, "I found my bones." And I said, "Were they in an accordion case?" "Yes," he said. So I said, "You still want these bones?" He said, "I do actually." No, he didn't pay me for them yet, but I sent them to him anyway. And since then, so he went up and down the parade with my bones, and since then, I think 7 people have ordered bones from Padstow in Cornwall. And the last one was a 16-year-old guy, a lovely guy, 16 years of age, and he got on to me and said, "I don't care what your bones cost, because my mother is paying for them." That's what he said. And he said, "Here's what I wanted to draw on them," and he sent me illustrations. So I did them for him, and he was carrying them. This weekend, this bank holiday weekend is when it is. So he promised me he'd send me videos of it. So that's, well, you need to.
Just to go back to the question about Abbeyfield and why there's a bones competition there when there's so few bones players. The reason there's I mean, I've written this before. You know, there are more bones players per acre around Abbey Field, in just kind of 5 miles around Abbey Field, than there are in the rest of the country in Ireland. And it's largely to do with this character called Paddy, this man, Paddy Sport Murphy, who was a flamboyant bones player, who taught, who I suppose he inspired people in his family and also in the locality. And so Abbey Field and the hills around became kind of a hotbed of bones playing. And so it's very local, and it's very much connected to a particular person. But you would not find the same concentration or density of bones players anywhere else on the island.
So, 2 things about that. Also this weekend is the Fly by the Field. So the bones competition is actually this Monday, and Mary and I are headed over. I'm going to be judging the juniors this year.
Oh, wow.
One of the people that was inspired by Paddy Sport Murphy was actually not his relative, but was another Murphy, Dave Murphy, who won the All-Ireland enough times that he decided to give someone else a chance, right? But then what he did was he trained all of his nieces and nephews and cousins. And so there's in his extended family, there's probably a half dozen people who have at least placed in the All-Ireland competition at this point. So he was one of the people inspired by sport that has trained a whole new generation of bones players. He's like a one-man equivalent of the Rhythm Bone Society.
Yeah, exactly.
And he goes to the schools as well, the local schools, and the winners go to the school.
That's right.
I met Dave Murphy a couple of weekends ago in Abbey, and I continued a conversation with him that I'd started 10 years ago about how did Sport Murphy teach it. And he told me again, this is how Sport Murphy taught. Now Dave hadn't played bones at all, he was a kid. I think he was about 12.
Right.
And his uncle sat down and said, right, can you do that? And Dave said,
That's like what happened to Ernie with his mentor, right? Can you do this?
Can you do that?
Sure.
And he said, and he did it again, can you do that? And he said, no. And Dave, or Sport said to Dave, go home until you can, and then come back, and I'll teach you some more. That's how it got him. And maybe that's why he was so flamboyant, because you're right, he used to sit down at the times I saw him anyway, and none of the others sat down, stood up. And he'd sit down, and there was a kind of it's like watching poetry, watching his arms go out and all sorts of clicks coming from everywhere.
I mean, he was a force. He was a force. So with fiddle players, box players, he himself on the harpsichord, because that was the instrument that sounded most like the ancient Irish wire strum harp, of which there were no players at that time. Now there are, but there weren't at that time. And also he brought in the bowron and the bones, because they were what he considered to be the traditional percussion instruments, even though they were little used at the time. And in fact, the word bowron was not commonly used to describe the drum. The word tambourine was used. Yeah. So that was really the common word. But of course, bowron sounds a little bit more Irish. Yeah. And it took off. And so, as part of a kind of nationalism in the music and everything, bowron became the name that was used. But he also introduced the bones. And his bones player was a guy called Ronnie McShane, who some of the older people now in the Rhythm Bone Society will remember. But Ronnie was also, interestingly, a very flamboyant player. He really was a flamboyant player. So there's something curious about the bones and the kind of people who were attracted to it, even in a culture, in the Irish culture, where actually all the etiquette said that you should play within. So, but Ronnie would play out. And Ronnie, he was very flamboyant. He would play in slow airs. Yeah, there'd be an air going, and Ronnie be, and I can't even do it, but Ronnie be, straight throughout the air, be doing all the gestures, yeah. And then when O'Riordan died in 1971 and his group finished, the Chieftains emerged. They had already emerged in the 1960s, and the Chieftains was modelled on Ceoltóirí Cúla. So the bones and the barrel were also intrinsic to that. So in a sense, the barrel and the bones became traditional music instruments in that moment, yeah, because that was kind of given the stamp of approval. If O'Riordan, and he was very influential, if O'Riordan said these were the traditional instruments of Ireland, then they were the traditional instruments. And then when the Chieftains began to, when they formed, they also had the barrel and bones. But they were used in ways that they were not ever used before. In other words, they were orchestrated. So the bones were used particularly in the Chieftains, and the barrel as well, in the way you'd expect percussion to be used in a chamber orchestra. Yeah, they weren't scored necessarily, but they were arranged. So it wasn't like a free-for-all. Donnan, Johnny Ringo McDonagh, was a very, very different. There were arrangements too, but that was a different. That had more. That wasn't That wasn't a blend of traditional and European. It was more like a blend of traditional and popular musics. Yeah, so these were kind of deeper grooves. So Johnny's really known for that kind of deep grooves with the bones and with the barrel. Despite all of that, yeah, despite the bones and the barrel being kind of put up on the stage, on the national stage by O'Riordan and the Chieftains, then internationally, yeah, the bones has not taken off in Ireland. They just haven't taken off. And I don't think they will, actually. I see no reason to believe that they will take off. There will always just be a few bones players in Ireland. That's my prediction. I'm quite happy with that.
I'm not.
If you have a few good bones players, that's better than a lot of not so good bones players.
You only want one anyway in a group.
Right.
You only want one in a group.
And, I have another. You go, because I've already asked.
Oh, historically before the revival. I'm assuming that in a hamlet somewhere there'd be a fiddle player and maybe bones or something, and then a different hamlet would have a different, or where are the bones more widely scattered throughout? Historically, way back.
Oh, way back. Well, there's no. The problem about the bones is that there's no historical records of them because they weren't considered to be instruments, musical instruments. They weren't considered to be important enough. And there's little enough evidence about the drum and the tambourine. It's just that there was so much more interest in it. And so the evidence is in whether you can buy them in catalogues or buy them in stores, whether there's advertisements for them, old playbills and things like that. But further back than that, there's just no evidence. There's tiny little bits in the sources, but not enough to construct a coherent narrative or history of it. There just isn't. And so we can't even be sure that there. Some people would argue that percussion, the barrel and the bones, or other forms, are not indigenous to the Irish to Irish musical culture. That actually that's a more recent thing. Now I find that kind of hard to believe, but it's hard to challenge it because there's no evidence to suggest one way or another whether that's the case.
But the fiddle came from Italy, and not that long ago. So I mean, how would you?
Huh.
It would seem to me that a person traveling, walking, would use mouth music and bones more commonly than they would worry about carrying an instrument around.
And dancing.
So even
Yeah,
in the
but
closet.
there's no documentary evidence of it. I mean, I think that's the point.
Well,
It was 1994.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mr. Guggenheim.
Oh, good.
well, if we have maybe one or two more questions, we're coming up on lunch here.
I have another one for the three of you that participated in the competition. I was very interested, reading through the rules. You had to present certain types of songs, and within the song you had to present a certain technique.
Well, Yeah, so I think I see where you're going, and I'd like to share a story that you may have heard from Steve Brown, so Steve Brown was, of course, our executive director for many years, is still on the board with us, and has won the All-Ireland Bones competition more than once, was, eventually asked to judge, and he was ready to judge the juniors, and they gave him this little blue composition book like you would use if you were taking a final exam or something like that, and you had to write an essay, and he thought, oh great, I'm finally going to get a look at the rules, right? And he opens it up and it's blank, right? So he turns to somebody on the gig rig with him, like this assistant or whatever, and he said, hey, do you have a copy of the rules? And he said, well, you're the adjudicator, you should know.
Exactly.
And so when you say a certain technique is required, it's not. The requirements are, at least currently, that you play a jig, you play one reel going into the next without stopping, and then you have one other tune type, right? And that's sort of...
Not a polka.
Well, except that Tommy Hayes said to James Yoshizawa, do you know why I picked you? And he said, why? He said, well, you were the only one who played a polka.
Ah.
And I said, I played a polka. And he said, well, you didn't play it as well as James.
But I was talking to Junior Davy about it, and he does kind of make up his rules in order to give a fair judgment.
Yes.
And but what he actually looks for is consistency between all, because we all have favourite rhythms. Like, I love jigs. Everyone I talk to here hates jigs. I don't know why. They're my favourite. Reels, I get bored, and polkas, I really can't do polkas. Hornpipes are lovely. We all have our own favourites, and what Junior looks for is somebody who's consistent in at least 3 different rhythms.
Right.
And then, I'll shut up then, Johnny Ringo McDonough judged it a few years ago. This is on the web. And he just, most of them, start 3, 2, 1, and he just, said, the winner of the competition is, and he gave the name. And he said, and the reason that I chose that person is just the best.
Right. So, I think you have pretty big variation. Junior's very consistent. The last 2 times that Junior has been the judge, John Ford has come in second and I've come in third, right? So he is very consistent in his evaluation process.
That costs more than a tenor, though, doesn't it?
Well, that's why, right, that's why I didn't come in first either time, that's because I wasn't willing to spend more than a tenor. But,
so he's really good.
He's really consistent, and I have a similar thing. I got to judge the juniors last year, and I said, okay, well, how am I going to do this? Because there were like 5 entries in between. There were 2 who were clearly better than the other 3. But the separation between the top 2 was minimal and somewhat subjective.
Yeah.
And then there was almost no separation between the other 3. And so, they said, well, these are kids. You're allowed to have ties, right? And so my criteria was, do they have good time? Is their rhythm consistent? Like, that's a basic criteria, and you get people who compete where it's not, right? So that's the starting point, and then another one is technique, right? So is their technique clean? One of the differences for me between the number 1 and the number 2 player last year in the juniors was that the number 1 player had a running double or a double that they could pull out from time to time, whereas the player who was second was only doing taps and triplets, right? So I felt like, oh, there's another tool in the toolbox here, right? Then the next thing, which is incredibly subjective, is, how well did they back the tunes, right? Did I feel like what they were doing was like really accented the melody well, right? And that's very subjective because some players play more like Balron, where it's subdivision only, whereas I think when I play the bones, I try to be a fiddle player who just has two pieces of wood, right? So I try to play the melody on the bones in so much as I can, right? Now, that's a subjective choice, right? So a different judge might feel very differently about it. And then the last thing was how much variation did they employ, right? That if they came up and just go duck at the duck at the duck at the duck, duck at the duck at the duck at the duck the whole way through a tune, that may be technically sound and it may check all of the other boxes, but it's not particularly exciting to listen to. So that was kind of the criteria that I used, but again, it varies wildly from judge to judge, and it's a single judge competition. So,
but the judges are always really accomplished bones players,
right,
which is good.
yeah.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean that they don't come with their B in their bones.
Also,
Most Irish bone playing is single-handed. Is there sort of a subtle bias against two-handed players or what?
Absolutely not. Well, I don't want to say absolutely, but in 2019, all three senior bones players that placed were two-handed bones players. Barry Patton from the United States, James Yoshizawa from the United States, and Graham Hargrove from Canada. So, and in 2022, Tommy Hayes took James Yoshizawa as his #1 pick. He had two one-handed players ranked behind him. As I said, Junior has placed me twice in the last few years. He's placed one-handed bones players ahead of me, but I don't know that he has a clear bias towards that. I think there may be some judges who do, but I think for the most part, it's not. The one thing that is interesting in terms of what Tommy Hayes says about this question is he says, sometimes I don't know who has it easier, the one-handed players or the two-handed players, right? And I'm not sure exactly what he means by this, but one thing that I think is very true is that there are things that really good one-handed bones players develop that two-handers don't, because they can just do it with the other hand, right? There are things that Junior Davey can do with bones in one hand that I don't even understand what he's doing physically, right? I mean, like, there are some great bones players out there where, James Yoshizawa is a perfect example. I can't do what James does, but when I watch him play, I understand everything that's happening. With Junior, when I watch him play, I don't physically understand how he's doing what he's doing. So, in a sense, you could say you should be biased towards one-handed bones players if they're really good. But again, it all comes down to, are they really good?
It depends it really does depend on the adjudicator. And, the other factor is that sometimes any particular adjudicator might think, well, I don't want to give all of the awards to either one-handed bone players or two-handed bone players, or I want to make sure that somebody local is in the top three. So there can be other kinds of criteria that are working across the purely musical or technical ones. But you'd only know that if you got into a conversation with the adjudicator afterwards.
But I've heard you say that you consider them two separate instruments, one-handed versus two-handed. Is that still true?
Did I say that?
I take back my question. I take back.
You did.
That's back when you were learning two-handed yourself.
Oh, yeah, well, I think they are too. Yeah, they are. I mean, that's only supporting what Skeffa said. Yeah, I mean, two hands just opens up a range of possibilities that are, a whole range in terms of even contrast in tone, and rhythmic combinations, polyrhythms. You've got twice as many moving parts. So of course it's an entirely different instrument. But you can, you know, somebody who plays in the groove on one hand, up with one hand, can be just as exciting as somebody who plays in the groove with two hands. The thing about two-handed bones players is that if it's not good, it's twice not as good.
Do you think the competition is it more judged as bones as an accompaniment instrument versus, because when I see it, I compare it more to like a Chenauce dance where you know, at that level maybe, you know, have it seen as more of you know, more of that flamboyant style, you know, as if you're just, you know, as a Chenauce dancer, you know, improvising and doing you know, doing your thing based on the music.
It's yeah, it is. I mean, within the tradition generally, the bodhrán and the bones are predominantly considered to be instruments of accompaniment.
Right.
And in bodhrán playing, you can definitely see that there's an element of that which has become, which is pushed out into the virtuosic, into the realm of self-expression.
That's, I guess, that's
yeah.
what it is.
And also, and so you see that, and this goes way back to, you know, what Tom was talking about, you know, with Johnny Ringo in Dedanon. He would have been one of the first to take like a solo break. Tommy Hayes, another person, and that's continued. But you don't see that in Bones playing.
Right, to see it as a solo instrument.
No,
like,
no.
Just like the way bodhrán is happening.
You don't, because it doesn't have the critical mass.
Right. Well, and
just so few Bones players that the fourth, and that. But just to say as well, in bodhrán playing, that has not progressed into a place where bodhrán players are solo percussionists. That has not happened. That will happen, and it's beginning to happen. But it's interesting how slowly it's happening. That's got something to do with the force of the tradition, of the prescription in the tradition about the role of it's a very new instrument. It's very new. It's only really 50, 60 years old, and it's had probably the most dramatic development of any instrument in the last 100 years anywhere on the planet. I mean, the development in the technique, bodhrán making itself, construction and playing styles has been extraordinary in the last 50 or 60 years from where it started off as something that wasn't even considered to be a musical instrument. Same is not true of the bones. But despite that, no solo tradition of bodhrán players, of bodhrán playing some, but that's beginning. There are signs of that beginning to happen. And the other thing that will naturally happen as well, because it happens in most sophisticated, developed percussion traditions, is that a form of ensemble percussion music making will eventually start to emerge. That hasn't happened yet. So you do see more and more duets, for example, at festivals and things like that, where bodhrán players like to get and riff off each other, because now they've got so many chops and so many grooves and so much interest in expressing themselves and showing off that that's developing. I've just, not just, but for a number of years now, I've been working with making an ensemble, the first traditional music percussion ensemble, which is 4 or 5 bodhrán players. So, you know, you go to other sophisticated traditions like in South India, where percussion ensemble is just de rigueur, and you find the same in North India, you find the same in West Africa, you find in Latin America. You don't find it in Ireland, but it's coming. So the bones is behind all of that, yeah. And in the competition, it's very much considered to be an accompanying instrument. Well, the thing about on the stage is that there's a more room for a bit of flamboyance because the bones is at the center of it.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I would say that what you can play on stage in the competition is not what you would ever play in a session, right? And that there is the adjudicator may judge you on being an accompanying instrument.
Yeah.
But the FLA committee absolutely wants to see Patty Sport Murphy and wants to see someone who is taking over as sort of a flamboyant a performing percussionist.
Yeah.
But again, even in the sessions in Abbeyfield, you would never play that.
Well, that's not quite true, sorry.
Okay.
It's not quite true. Because the good Bones players that go up on the stage on the back of the truck in the square in Abbeyfield, of course there's a bit more license because it's a Bones competition, but many of them are just playing the style that they do play in the sessions.
Right.
And so there is some players, if they're really, really good, they play with people regularly and they build up musical relationships with them. They're very welcome. They're not constrained in the same way as maybe some others. So it's kind of session by session as well. Some sessions you walk into, you just know there's no appetite. Yeah, it won't be very welcome. Another session you walk into, this is if you're bad, you're not welcome in any session. Yeah, but if you can play, then you can, and if you can play appropriately in any session, then I think you are welcome. But a lot of the players, and the reason they win or that they, get placed is because they're playing in what the adjudicator might call like a really good traditional style, whatever that might be.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
you just reminded me of something both of you. Steve Brown, I watched him compete. I think it was 2012, and he had won the competition twice. And he competed, and he had a friend of his was a great banjo. It was only and he arranged his thing this time.
Yeah.
And part of the arrangement was for a few bars, he was doing the solo. And he did the solo.
Exactly.
And Steve is a great Bones player, and I love the way he does this kind of because he's a lazy kind of I don't know if somebody has a name for it. I think the bones are nearly horizontal, and then he goes like, and it fell completely flat. He came off the stage and he came past me and said, I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
Simply because the bones, everything stopped, and it was just, it was fair play to them for
They're not ready for it. They're not ready for it.
Yeah.
They're not ready
But
for
even when they are, it'd be hard to pick the same. Like when you play a Bowron solo,
Yeah.
there's something primal about that, and when you play Bones solo, it's a bit rattly.
Yeah, I've done bone solo part of things and it works. You can do it, but it is possible to do it. Just behind. It just hasn't had the same number of people with the same passion. The reason the Bowron has developed so much is because of so many young people being really excited by it and just spending hours and hours and hours just exploring and inventing. It's about invention. There's been an enormous amount of invention. And for a good number of years, technique was behind invention. So there was a lot of really annoying Bowron players who were trying all sorts of things that just never quite locked in. And there's nothing, there's nothing more disturbing for the listener than something that's out of time. I think it's even harder for us to take than something that's out of tune. The out of timeness you feel in your belly, the out of tuneness is somewhere up in the head. You can kind of, you can rationalize it. But once the technique, and what a lot of people say, once the desire to also sit into the groove matched up with this new virtuosity and this new invention, then something really exciting started to happen. So when you see a young player who's both inventive, has developed their repertoire of rhythmic ideas beyond the traditional, like beyond the limited number of grooves that's in older Bowron playing, beyond motor rhythm, but who's also able to fit into the groove, that can be incredibly exciting. It's a different aesthetic, and it's one that has developed alongside the relationship between the guitar, for example, and rhythmic accompaniment on the guitar and the music, but also it's gone along with the development of syncopated playing in the tunes themselves and new tune writing. So it's the Bowron is a kind of modern instrument that has developed alongside
element of modern traditional music playing. So you see it, that's why you see it in bands now. So, and it's really driving. Cool. And it's the relationship between the bodhrán and the guitar player. That's something very significant that's happened in the last 20 years. They're like it's like a rhythm section.
Yeah.
And that's where the excitement is, because that thing, you see two people playing in unison, that's something they've planned, and they've really worked out the most exciting grooves, and they're going to deliver that to you with like extraordinary kind of precision, yeah, and fire. Then it's a winner. You're absolutely onto a winner, I think. And the Bones can do that as well. It's just there aren't enough players playing it. So you don't have lots of Bones players in Ireland sitting around. You just don't. You never see it. You see it at Abbey Field, but that's it. You never ever see it anywhere else. You would never see a grouping like this in Ireland. Yeah? This would be like most musicians' nightmare. Yeah, fiddle players' nightmare. You bring them here, they're like going to a gulag. One of Trump's gulags.
All right, so we're going to wrap it up.
I think we're reaching the end here.
Yes.